Welcome to the first lesson of Module 5, which is the character drawing workflows. In this particular lesson, we're going to be discussing the rough and refined stages when drawing characters. And let me say up front that both this module and this lesson are very, very important. It's very important, particularly, that you grasp these two stages, the rough and refined stages. And we'll go into it in a moment. This entire module covers the character drawing workflow or workflows, how we implement our theory into producing a nice finished piece of work. Now, Module 6 has a lot of additional and crucial character design theory. So you might want to do Module 5, go to Module 6, and then come back to Module 5 again, and then understand how to add in all those additional theories, right? Drawing workflows, general global art workflows, painting workflows, they all generally offer a similar theme. And that theme is these two stages of rough and refined. Another way to understand this is that we want to see our two global stages, our big kind of breakdown stages, as one being the construction stage and the other one being the rendering stage. Or another stage being, or another way to put it, a planning phase and then an implementing phase. Or another way to put it again would be planning the drawing and then drawing the drawing, right? It may sound ridiculous. Don't you just sit down and draw something amazing? Well, no, not really. Perhaps when you're very experienced, you're able to do that. But we need to implement theory in some kind of logical ordering, right? And we need to build drawings up in some kind of logical way, as you've seen where we've been working and talking about things like shape and form and detail. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. I've got two examples here. And on the left-hand side, we see the construction of the drawing, and I'm particularly messy in my construction, so you can see the construction of this portrait drawing here, and then the final drawing, which itself is not super neat, but it's relatively fun, and it's got kind of a bit of a roughish, sort of traditional kind of look to it. All right, and you might think to yourself, well, how on earth is it possible to go from this to this? And we'll get into that. Here is another example, which is a elf character. And this was the construction drawing, and literally I did the construction drawing, I put a layer on top, and I immediately drew this on the right. And once again, you might feel like, well, there seems to be some kind of gap in the knowledge. How did you draw, her armor and her cloth? How did you think of the details for those things? Why is there no planning for those sort of minute details? And, look how crazy and messy this is. How do you go from this messiness to this neatness? And we'll go into that more in detail as we move through this module. However, just understand that this is completely and absolutely possible, and it's about mindset, which we're going to talk about just now. It's all about mindset. When you're doing construction and planning, you are in one mindset. When you're doing refined lines and cleaning and finishing up your drawing, you're in another mindset. And a good example for this that I want to bring to the table is an analogy of cooking. So something I find with my students, before we get into the analogy, is that they tend to try to be neat and clean and all super detailed, and they're so worried that their work isn't going to look good, so they're trying to be all neat in every phase. So they're planning neatly, and they're trying to draw the volumes neatly, and everything's super neat, and it ends up making this really terrible drawing at the end of the day that's really tight and lifeless, and the planning hasn't been well thought out because they couldn't plan properly because they were so worried about it looking good. Let's go to the cooking analogy. Think about it. Is a kitchen that has got chefs in it super clean and super neat? I mean, obviously clean in terms of health, but I mean, it's not a neat place. There's food everywhere. There's plates everywhere, there's cooking utensils, oil splashing, people are frying up things, there's flour scattered about, and all the bits and pieces of the food that they're making. However, when you're at the restaurant and you order the meal, and the meal comes to you, it comes to you on a beautiful plate. Hopefully, let's talk about a high-end restaurant here. It's clean, it's neat, you're served well, the food is on the plate, it looks delicious, it's cooked well, it's wonderful. But that wonderful food and its presentation is only really a product of the planning that happened in the kitchen and the understanding of the ingredients and the cooking temperatures and adding all those various things together, right? And so the kitchen is a messy place. It's messy, it's untidy. Perhaps it's not as untidy in a metaphorical sense as my left drawing here. But that depends on the kind of person you are. As long as you know you're planning well and you know that you're not looking for good looks in your rough, right? Because you will get to the good looks in the refined stage. The analogy points to that you need to be loose, right? We've talked about looseness and being loose in your lines and what tight lines do and what loose lines do, all right? And so how we want to think about this is that the rough stage is our planning stage, right? Or the planning of the drawing is literally the planning of the drawing, right? It's the foundations of the drawing. Weak foundations on the left mean a weak drawing on the right. Strong foundations on the left mean a strong drawing on the right, okay? So you have to understand this is a planning phase, and in this phase, right, phase one, let's just call it phase one, the rough stage / the planning stage / the construction phase, we are building foundations. And so your mindset here, let's say, is much more academic. Your mindset is, how do I need to implement the theory? How can I ensure asymmetric shapes? How can I ensure there are opposing curves and no parallels, etc., etc., etc.? And we're applying the theory and we're building the forms and we're adding dynamism and we're worrying about shapes and we're worrying about all the fundamental stuff, but we don't worry about the finishing or the details, okay? And it is a creative phase, but it's more of a construction creative phase. So you're being creative in a constructive sense in your rough phase or your planning phase on the left. And when you get to the right, this is the time where you can have that loose freedom and creativity that you kind of see in movies where they're just drawing amazing things. This phase, once you've got the strong construction, you draw on top of the strong construction a new layer or a new page or what have you. And now, because your foundations are so strong, you actually are free within the restrictions you've set for yourself in the foundation. You're quite free to do as you wish and to line weight and detail as you wish, because things on the left are in their right place, in their right location, at their right size, with all the right theories implemented, and you know what's in front and what's behind, and things are foreshortening and overlapping, and there's line overlaps, and all that jazz is happening on the left. And on the right, you are free to be creative and loose, and definitely the most fun phase is on the right. And usually, the irony is that the planning actually takes a shorter amount of time to do, and the refined takes longer, but the planning is harder to do, right? The planning on the left is harder to do because it requires all the bulk of our theory. And then the right side, the refining, is not that hard to do. It just takes a longer time because you want to get those lines nice, and you think about the line weights and you're adding little details, all right? But they're really incidental. You make them up a lot of the times on the spot. Okay. Now, once again, I know that you're thinking to yourself, well, there still seems to be a huge gap in my knowledge. And once again, I'll say we will get there, because as beginners, you will need to move beyond just 2 stages. But you need to understand that this is where we want to get to. We want to get to 2 stages, but we're going to break these down into a few more stages as we move on. All right, so another analogy that I wanted to give you is the idea of a building construction site. So imagine if they are doing a beautiful skyscraper in the middle of the city. That construction site does not look beautiful. There are trucks and machines everywhere, concrete everywhere, reinforced steel bars, workers that are filthy, because they're dealing with sand and stone and drilling and screwing things in and doing all the kind of stuff that they do on a construction site. The reason I'm being so emphatic about this is that while you may think you get it, it depends who you are, you might get it. From my experience, generally speaking, I have to be super clear, super emphatic. It is so important that you are absolutely rough and loose and focusing only on implementing theory in your rough stage. Don't worry about looks, don't worry about beauty, don't worry about appeal per se. Just use the theories of how we're getting appeal, the theories of how we're building forms, the theories of dynamism, the theories of line weights, the theories of the composition and stuff like that, right? And that's why module 6 is important, because it's going to add tons of theories. It's really the golden module. But just understand that that is our construction site. We must have a construction site and we must be free and loose to build, right? And then when we move to the refined stage, now we can add glass and decide on the furniture in the building and what paintings we're going to put in the foyer and all that jazz, right? So you can see that it's much more of a meaningless stage in terms of theory and getting things right, the refined stage. But of course, the refined stage is important as well. You need both stages to get a good drawing. Okay, so I want to be emphatic and I want to say to you guys, please remember this. Remember these stages. strive for these stages, go crazy in the rough stage, get things right according to the theory, and then be free in the refined stage. You can be more creative and more loose in the refined stage to get that refined drawing out. All right, we are going to break these down into smaller stages, which you'll learn to combine into these two in the next few lessons. So let's move on to those lessons, and I'll see you there. In this lesson, we're now going to look at breaking down the workflow into more manageable pieces at first, before we just move straight on to doing a rough and a refined stage. The word workflow really means the flow of work, the logical ordering of the steps we take to get our work done and get it down on the page. So having a good workflow is very important for us because it's kind of like a map. It helps us to not get lost along the way en route to our to the end of our journey, right, to our goal. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at some theoretical principles here, and then we're going to move on in the next lesson to a very long yet hopefully detailed demo for you, right? So first off, we have our rough and refined. We've discussed it in the previous lesson, and at least from a theoretical perspective, we kind of have an idea of what these guys entail. And all the while we think about the drawing workflow, we also want to think about our general art theory of shape, then form, and then detail in those kind of percentage splits, because ultimately it's this sort of global breakdown of art in general that informs these stages. Now, in our rough stage, you could say, in a sense, that we have shape, form, and detail happening here, right? Shape, form, and detail. Right, but we could break things down even more. In terms of shape, we would have gesture, and we'd also have opposing curves. We'd also have our loose lines, etc., etc. And there are quite a few theories that would fall under shape, composition, and so forth. And many of these things we touch, especially in Module 6. And then in terms of form, we have our 3D and our drawing through, right? And then we also have our dynamic forms, which are really informed by shape, right? So shape informs the dynamic form. And the idea is that we kind of building up these things, shape, form, and then details. And of course, form as well also has multiple levels of theories that plug into form. And then when we get to detail, this would be things like anatomy, right? The anatomical details. Now, of course, we know that generally speaking, the anatomy of the character would inform the dynamic forms. But we want to learn the basic forms for the purpose of drawing first, and then add the anatomical details. Right, and this would also be the facial features, and the clothing, or the armor, etc., etc. The color of the hair, and so on. Not the color of the hair, the style of the hair, and so on and so forth. And the refined stage, really, in a general sense, is cleanup. And cleanup would be clean lines, right? Clean lines, easy to read lines. It may be coloring. It may be some compositional changes. It's really just cleaning the entire drawing up. And to be honest with you, a lot of people would be able to do the refined stage because it's not a lot of the work. We want to remember that we have sort of something like a 90%, 10% split in terms of theory between the two stages. And of course, we want to remember that we have something like a 20% and a 80% split in terms of time, because refinement takes a lot of time, but it doesn't take a lot of theory. Right. And so here we kind of see just this general kind of workflow happening here. And so we might think to ourselves, all right, so that if I want to do a good drawing, I may need to follow something like do gesture first, and then I'm going to do like the forms on top, and then maybe I'm going to do the anatomy because I want to make sure I get the anatomy right, and then maybe on top of that I'm going to do clothes and other details. Let's just say and other details. And then once I've done that, I'm going to kind of refine this whole rough piece. And you can see we're already at 5 stages here, and then maybe we're going to add a 6th phase, then we're going to start doing clean lines, and then maybe after that we'll do clean or we'll do line weights, etc. And we're getting to a lot of phases, and perhaps I think we could agree at a workflow that is this long, it's going to take a very long time to actually get a good drawing out in a reasonable space of time. Now, of course, for the purposes of learning, this is not a bad model to at least understand that in some fundamental way, this is kind of how we're going to be working. But what we want to do is we want to kind of combine some of these steps, get ourselves a bit of a shorthand, because, for example, there's no reason for us to, in the forms section, draw basic forms first and then add dynamism to them, when if we have a solid understanding of what the basic form is, we might as well just draw the dynamic form, right? And the dynamic form can then just be influenced by what our gesture is. And so, using all the theories we've learned so far, we're going to combine a lot of these steps into 4 major steps, which we will then move forward with. And then hopefully, as we're doing those steps, as we're doing drawings, you're doing your assignments, and you're watching the demos, you're growing to see how you can actually just have 2 stages, a rough stage and a refined stage, where you know what you want to plug in into each stage. And so the 4 stages that we're going to be breaking down all of our work into moving forward, just for a few demos, is stage 1 would be our dynamic forms. So we're going to just start off straight out with the bat with dynamic forms and build an entire figure with the dynamic forms. Then 2, we're going to move on to rough details. And we'll just put all the rough details that we need in there at once, whether it's anatomy or clothing, the hairstyle or what have you. We'll put all the rough details as to who the characters is in terms of their outfit and the appearance and their expression and so on. We'll put that all into the rough details phase. Then we'll do a refined rough. And this is us really solidifying and saying, okay, I definitely want these things in, I don't want these things in. We're going to refine it a bit. The refined rough must read. Okay, it must read clearly, even though it's going to look super messy. It's going to write here, probably looks messy. And that's fine, because it's a rough, it's a construction drawing, it's a planning drawing. And then last but not least, we are going to do the cleanup drawing. And so we're going to be simplifying all of our theory into these phases. And we'll start getting used to dynamic form drawing, adding rough details onto the dynamic forms, refining that rough, and then cleaning it up in one fell swoop. And that is what we are going to move on to next, a nice lengthy demo on this particular drawing workflow. I'll see you guys there. We're now going to be taking a look at a 4-stage workflow speed demo. And this speed demo is a 13-minute demo where we're going to go through the dynamic forms, the rough details, the refined rough, as well as the cleanup stages. Now, some important things I want you to remember is that we want to be aware of what we need to be focusing on at each stage of the workflow. This particular demo leaves out many core theories from Module 6, Character Design, and allows us to keep design theories to a minimum so that our focus is really on the workflow. Don't worry about looks too much when you're practicing this in your own work. Just focus on grasping the workflow as best as you can. Following this 13-minute speed demo is the full 2-hour demo of this particular workflow, so please do watch it as you feel you need to. Alright, let's get started, and we're going to move into the dynamic forms stage first. So as we start in this stage, we're really focusing on the forms, just getting the basic forms down. Now, obviously, we want to think about kind of the pose, the angles that we want to do. We want to bring in that gesture theory, but we're not worrying about or being too overly concerned about details. You know, we're not going to add pockets at this stage and different clothing designs and things. No, we're just going to focus on the big forms and the big masses. You'll see here that I'm busy measuring out the proportions. I've checked the angles from our gestural knowledge, the horizontal and vertical tilts. I've given them a bit of a check. You'll see I've done some circular heads just to kind of measure out the proportions. I wouldn't say they're 100%, but in this demo, we're going for a Caped Crusader type of character. So I've made his proportions just a little bit more sort of heroic. And I'm using the basic cylinder forms, really, the basic cylinder forms and the basic forms we've learned in the anatomy module to kind of really just get those anatomical forms down to allow me to draw on top. At this stage, you really want to get the pose that you want down. You can experiment, of course, it's the rough stage. Don't feel you have to draw anything really perfectly here. Experiment, move things around, move parts around. If you're working digitally, sometimes it's very easy to just do a selection and move it around. And also if you're working on paper, stages 1, 2, and 3, you'd really just all do on the same piece of paper, just kind of erasing it and making it lighter at each stage, and then doing your cleanup on the last page. There you can see I flipped the page around. You can use a mirror if you're working traditionally. This is very useful. It helps you adjust your eye to the pose to see if you've drawn any angles weirdly. And you can see I made a tilt adjustment there. And then I end off by really just solidifying a lot of the forms. I add in the sort of the cape form, just the basic shape of it. And that brings us to the end of working on the forms. The basic pose gets completed and we're ready to move on to the next stage. Make sure that as you end each stage, you're doing everything you need to for that particular stage of the work. So in dynamic forms, make sure that the pose is really solid and then move over to the rough details. With the solid foundations of our dynamic form stage down, we're free to move into our rough details stage. And we drop the opacity of the lower layer, or if you're working on paper, you can simply just erase lightly with a kneaded eraser and then draw on top. This particular phase is really about getting everything in the right location and looking relatively right, but we don't have too much concern for things looking neat and clean. We want to get things in. So everything that needs to be in should be in. All the design elements. Here you can see I'm adding the shape of his logo and a lot of the details of the anatomy, but not in some excruciatingly detailed way, just kind of a general way. So you want to think of it as getting all the elements you need in a general way, and then when we move to the next phase, we can then refine those rough details a little bit more. You can see here there's not really much attention paid to his facial expression or his hair design that much, although we'll probably just kind of enhance his hair design a little bit later on. But it's making sure the bulk of the details are in, but that the bulk of the details aren't necessarily detailed. Once again, keep in mind that this is a rough stage, so everything's game, everything's changeable. Don't feel locked into anything. You'll see that even I will make multiple changes to the legs and the arms and various other elements. That's what it's about. We're building something. And of course, we're going to have various challenges along the way that we need to address, right? Things that don't look right to us or things we feel could look better. And this is definitely one of the good stages to change it. And of course, the next stage as well. There you can see I adjust the tilt once again. I'm kind of thinking about additional elements that I may want in the piece, anatomical details, costume details, and so on. You want to strive to be feeling confident with each stage in itself. Don't think to yourself, oh, does this look good? Does this look good? It's not about looking good necessarily at these stages. It's more about, is it theoretically correct? Does it make sense? Am I implementing the various theories? In this case, for example, the tilts. Are the tilts there? Are the opposing curves there? Does my line of action make sense? Is it strong enough? And here you see me adding additional details and costume details to the rough details phase, and getting the bulk of all the details in. Building on those foundations. The key thing to remember as we move into stage 3 is that this actual video lesson is really about workflow. I want you guys to understand and grasp the workflow, the concept of the workflow, and the various stages of the workflow. Think about what theories would plug into each stage. When would I use shape theories? When would I use form theories? When would I use both? When would I do detail theories? Should I be thinking about shape in the refined rough stage? The answer to that would obviously be yes. This particular stage is where we are refining these rough details up to a more appealing level. We're adding in elements, we're adding in details, we're making things look cleaner, we're making things look more readable, and we're building on that rough details foundation that we came from before. Once again, we made the layer a lot lighter. Once again, on paper, you would erase with the kneaded eraser and make it a little bit lighter. And we draw on top, iterating, adding details, making changes, and so forth. An important thing to note at this stage is that this is really our last opportunity to make structural changes. Because when we do move into the cleanup stage, you're not really going to be able to, in a decent, timely fashion, make massive sweeping changes. You want to make sure that your structure is 100% exactly as you would have it before you move on to the cleanup stage. And so the refined rough stage here is where you want to make any final changes. If you're unhappy with something, change it, go for it. It's still game. As long as you're in the rough stage, you can change anything. And you can build anything from dynamic forms up to rough details, up to refined rough, once again, even in this stage, on this particular layer, if you wish. So go for it. Don't be afraid. I changed that leg twice. This is the first change I'll make, and I'll change it again. Because I'm not 100% satisfied that he is looking heroic enough and bulky enough. You'll also see in a few moments that I will do checks. I will check for parallels, which is from shape theory. I will check the proportions, which is from anatomy theory. And I will make adjustments based on what I think is more correct. And so a lot of the time you'll find that having things correct according to shape theories, form theories, detail theories is what will make the piece look good. Not trying to make it look good, but implementing those theories that you know the theory is correct. And because the theory is correct, it looks good because it looks right. It's still very messy, it's still very rough, and honestly, go for it. It can be messy, it can be rough because we're building, right? Or we're cooking in the kitchen. So just be messy, be rough, and do what you need to do to make it work. Here I check the proportions and I was checking the forms. I realized his torso was a little bit long, so I kind of brought it down from the crotch. I brought the crotch area up a little bit. And then I also noticed some parallels in terms of the silhouette of the legs, which I then changed so that the internal negative space shape didn't have a silhouette. There's my second change of the leg. I brought it in more because I wanted him to lean back a little bit more, seem a little bit top heavy. And really get that feeling of confidence out in the character. And I'm pretty happy with most of the rough details here. I do a little bit of extra work on the face, adding in some additional facial details, and we move on to the next phase. In this stage, we have quite a mindset shift. We're really wanting to be loose with the lines, get really perfectly straight lines going, focusing on the shapes, making sure things look really good as they can. We kind of want to avoid sketchiness and roughness and really have a more of a clean look now. Unless, of course, the style you're going for has a bit of a rough look, then of course go for it. And really being loose with your arm and also thinking very much about dynamic shapes, just the basic flat abstract 2D shapes, making sure they're dynamic. You'll see here as I move through the piece, I'm adding in final details. I don't stick strictly to the underlying plan, and that's really because I want to keep the lines loose, and sometimes when you're moving very quickly, the line is not going to be exactly to plan, but it will still look good. And so in a sense, I'm tracing over my drawing. But I'm being quick, I'm being loose with the strokes. I'm making sure things read, they're very, very clear. If I've defined dimensionality in one of the previous stages, I want to enhance that definition here. and I move over all of the elements that I've drawn out, creating these clean lines, these quick lines, generally trying to draw with a thinner kind of line, because when we get to line weighting, it's easier to weight up a line than it is to weight down a line. So it's easier to make lines thicker than it is to make them thinner. So you kind of want to start off with a thinner line, and it makes it easier to weight it up. I'm very conscious, extremely conscious about overlaps at this stage, because I don't have all of these rough lines everywhere to help me see the difference between forward and background objects. The overlaps become extremely important. And so you'll want to be thinking to make sure that all of your overlapping lines read very clearly. And then once that is done, we move on to line weighting, which helps the overlaps and shows us what is in front, what is behind. I do two kinds of line weighting here. We'll cover this in a later module in more detail, but essentially I thicken up any lines that overlap other lines. So any objects really that are in front of other objects, they get thicker lines. For example, the head in front of the neck. And then a underlying line, so a line that is being overlapped, I will put what is called a hook shadow underneath. It's almost like a small triangle shadow, and it comes from below that object. You'll see hook shadows pretty much everywhere there is an overlapping line. Don't worry too much about that for now, though. We will go into it in much more detail later on. But focus on really the mindset at this stage of the workflow. It's a very much an easy stage. It's very, very easy. There's not much thinking to be done because you've done all the thinking already. It's really cleaning up, refining, making little tweaks and adjustments, making the lines clean, making it look pretty. It's the icing on the cake. It's important to note that really you can't do this stage on a poorly designed work in the other three stages. It's basically polishing a turd. It's still going to be a turd. It's just a very shiny turd. So don't worry too much about this if you haven't got the structural stuff down. Get the structure down first. Finally, each consecutive stage tends to take longer than the stage before. This stage probably took about the same length of time as the first three stages. Yet it required less thought, just more time in making things look nice. As we end this lesson, let me emphasize workflow, workflow, workflow. This lesson has been about workflow and helping you grasp and understand the stages of the workflow, and also how powerful a good workflow can be to getting the final work done. Ultimately, we want to end up with a great drawing. We want to understand how to make drawings look great and look good. But before that, we need to grasp the workflow. So please don't worry about looks at this stage. Don't worry about looks even in terms of your own work when you're practicing this. Just focus on getting the stages of the workflow done and grasping this concept of workflow. And that's the end of this lesson. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. In this last lesson, I thought we could talk a little bit more about workflow as well as finding your own workflow. As you can no doubt see by this phase of the course, there are quite a lot of theories that plug into different stages, different theories that plug into shape, different theories that plug into form and detail, and so on and so forth. And you can also see how, especially in lesson 2, how we've kind of broken down some of the things you might want to do to have a strong workflow in building your drawing up from the ground up. Now, obviously, things can go into very granular detail. You could arguably start a drawing with a very shape-based life gesture, then build carefully forms on top of that, then add dynamic forms and so on, as we had noted in in lesson 2. But at the end of the day, what you want to end up with is something that works well for you. You will need to eventually draw on whatever theories you need to get the piece down. And you'll find that when you're moving to a two-stage workflow, you end up combining multiple types of theories together. So for example, you would be drawing from your gestural knowledge, let's say shape-based gestures where we have dynamic shapes. You might draw a character that has a form-based chest, a form-based head, and then for the limbs you simply just do shape-based gestures for the limbs. And why not? Because you ultimately say to yourself, well, I really do understand what the form is going to look like on top. I don't really need to draw the dynamic forms, perhaps not anymore if you've gained significant experience in that, or you're just generally experienced in that, or if you have a very superior anatomical knowledge, you kind of just indicate vaguely what that's going to look like. Nevertheless, do know that there isn't such a thing as a perfect workflow. There's rather kind of workflows that follow the same general principles, but each artist kind of does things in their own unique way. I've seen artists that will do this type of workflow on each element individually first. So they'll do shape and then rough details and then refined details and then the cleanup lines on just the head, and then move over to the chest. And they build the entire image piece by piece. And that is totally doable, right? If you think like that, or if that works for you, then do it. That is totally doable. And conversely, I've seen artists that need to do everything in a very long, perhaps very in-depth workflow where they want to get the gesture absolutely perfect. Then they want to get the dynamic forms absolutely perfect. Then they want to get the anatomy absolutely perfect. However, over time, you will find yourself molding and bringing in all the elements that you need, using the theories simultaneously. So my encouragement to you is that, especially if you are very new at drawing and you're still in the beginning stages, perhaps this is your first drawing course, follow that workflow fairly explicitly, and it will be a good foundation for you moving forward. You know, a lot of people will say, well, there's 50 million ways that you could do drawing. You know, there's 50 different kinds of ways you can do drawing. You could draw this workflow, this workflow, this workflow. But I strongly believe that if you teach someone to do one thing very well, they have a foundation. Then when they can do that one thing very well, let them go and explore the other types of workflows. So I say to you, definitely learn from this workflow, use it, build on it. You understand how the theory at this stage of the course plugs into it, build on it. So learn this particular workflow well, use it, be successful with it, and then of course explore how you can either make it shorter, make it quicker, improve on it. Perhaps you can make it more efficient for yourself, etc., etc. Perhaps you get to a phase where you even draw in one stage. You don't even have a two-stage workflow of rough and refine. That's great. But really just remember to always base your drawing and your thinking about drawing on all the fundamental art theories that we've been learning. I hope that this module has been extremely helpful to you. Please work very hard in your assignments, and then I will see you in what is probably one of the most exciting modules in the entire course, Module 6. I'll see you there.